Hi everyone, my name is David Clifford. I'm the science lead at Mineral, and today is the 5th of December, which is the UN World Soils Day, which is a great opportunity to bring some focus on the importance of a really precious resource, which is healthy soils, and to use, I guess, a platform like this Alphabet Modeling Talks to advocate for how we can more sustainably manage this resource. We will focus today on bringing machine learning to estimate how carbon stocks and concentration are evolving globally over the last 40 years. My experience, there are machine learning based approaches to estimating and tracking carbon change, which don't necessarily provide much insight into why things are changing or much interpretability into why things are changing. There are mechanistic models for carbon change also, which I think struggle to generalize beyond the handful of locations where there's a lot of data gathered over a long period of time. And today's work by Dr. José Padarian Campusano is kind of a blending of those two. It's a semi-mechanistic model within a machine learning framework where they've pulled together, really comprehensive set of carbon data from around the world to get that to work. So José is originally from Chile, where he did ag engineering. He moved to Sydney about 10 years ago to work at the University of Sydney, and he did a master's and a PhD there with Alex McBratney and his colleagues, Alex McBratney and Budiman Manasni. And so, yeah, just very excited to see the work that José has done. I had the joy of visiting this group about 2 years back, and I've seen great progress since. So, José, over to you.
Oh, thanks. Let me share my screen here. Yeah, I hope you can see my screen.
We can indeed.
Yeah, perfect.
Mode, yeah,
perfect.
Let's see if this is over Google. Okay, I don't know what happened there. Error with Google. Guys, if you can fix that. Okay, we'll give it a try just like this. Yeah,
this works.
So like David mentioned, today I'll be sharing a little bit about the work that we've been doing here at the University of Sydney related to soil carbon and its evolution in time over the world. My name is José Padarian, and this is a little bit of the work that I've done with my colleagues at the University of Sydney. Alex McBratney is here as well, our team leader. So yeah, about myself, like David already mentioned, I'm a soil scientist originally from Chile. I'm an agronomist, and I have a master in philosophy and a PhD in soil modeling. I have extensive experience in soil modeling, working more than 10 years here at the University of Sydney. But I'm also applying these models in different contexts in the industry as a consultant for multiple ag-tech companies here in Australia and other countries. And like in the last few years also, I'm part of participating in the work that the UN, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN has been coordinating as I'm the Chilean scientific appointee for the development of national digital soil maps. Digital soil maps was part of the spatial modeling that we do. We work here at the University of Sydney at multiple scales, from the farm all the way to the global scale. And that's today I'll show you an example of that. Again, like David already mentioned, this is not a coincidence I'm giving this talk today. Today is the World Soil Day. And for this year, it's important to acknowledge and recognize the functions that soils have and its relationship, particularly with water. Soil and water are obviously very connected. The poor system of soils have like a great capacity to store water, and that's the water that a lot of obviously vegetation in general uses, but also is used in agriculture. Obviously rain-fed agriculture uses that water to produce different crops. Soils also have mechanisms, internal mechanisms to immobilize solutes and suspend materials, so it acts as a filter of water. So it's very important in the water cycle and to actually have the clean water. So salts play a key role in water securing, which is one of the existential environmental challenges. Of course, that's not the only challenge that we have as humanity. There's other 6 that we recognize, like climate change, mitigation, food security and nutrition, energy securing, human health, like the health of ecosystem and environment, and biodiversity protection. And we consider that soil is central, like for all these existential challenges. And well, because soils of the world are also under a lot of pressure at the global scale, we actually consider soil security, securing soils, like an extra challenge, and one of these existential challenges. That's why here at the University of Sydney, led by Alex McBrady, we're working in this soil security framework, like a new soil security framework, which is a quantitative framework that try to connect and acknowledges 5 dimensions of soils: capacity, or its natural capacity; condition, which is like the effect or its condition after we as humans intervene soils; also trying to connect it with capital and try to give it like a value, if you want to say, a monetary value, so other people that mostly talk in those terms, we can also make them understand the value of soils. And also in terms of connectivity with people, not only people that work directly with the soil, but in general, and codification in terms of if there are policies that protect them. And we try to do this like across different, all the soil functions and services that the soil provide, and also the multiple threats to soils. To do that, we use different soil indicators, or a property if you want, and try to build what we call utility graphs to try to represent the relationship between this and some sort of target that we have. And soil organic carbon, which is why I'm focusing today on that, is recognized as one of the key indicators. So we can see that it shows up in multiple of these services and ecosystem services, not just as a soil as a storing carbon, but also an interaction with other services and functions. And that's why we want to focus, and we focus a lot in soil science in soil organic carbon. At a global scale, so mapping soil organic carbon is obviously not new. There's like multiple efforts, initiatives trying to provide this information. Different projects like Global Soil Map, they're trying to bring different countries together to take the national maps and compile a global soil map. And other institutions like ISRIC, that they have like a top-bottom approach where they model the whole world themselves. And with FIO and United Nations, and maybe if you know anything about carbon, you've heard about the 4 per mil initiative as well, which are trying to map this as well, but based on global soil map specifications. The problem, or not, yeah, let's say it's a problem so far, it's that traditional approaches, or at least most of the implementations that we have, are static. So we have like one picture of, or one single map of the condition of the soils based on legacy data. But most soil properties are dynamic. And so organic carbon is one of them, of course, so it varies a lot in space, but also in time. Another big problem, and one of the threats that's been recognized on soils, is that one of the greatest threats is the expansion of agriculture and forestry areas. So that's one of the reports of the IPCC. And so that's why we think that it's crucial to integrate land cover changes dynamics into soil organic carbon assessment. And this work that I present is a bit of effort to provide, of course, soil information, but also incorporating in a mechanistic way these dynamics. So yeah, so I'm going to start a little bit like talking about the model, and I'm going to show you some of the results that we have so far. For this specific work, we're working in a two-step model, a semi-mechanistic model, in which we generate first like a baseline of soil organic carbon for a specific year, and then after that year, we have like a land cover tracking procedure, in which we identify where and when land cover changes occur. Of course, from which we keep track of what was the actual change from which land cover to which land cover, and for how long that land cover persists. And given all those parameters, we're able to make an inference of the amount of soil organic carbon that we lose or gain. We're using a compilation of soil profile data, which basically has depth, soil organic carbon, and location, obviously, so in the geospatial context. And this is an ongoing effort that's been going for many years, where we're trying to get information from multiple things that are publicly available, but also other partners, people that are interested in monitoring soils. The methodology that we use, particularly talking about the baseline here, it's something that we call digital soil mapping, which is basically a way of connecting a soil property or predicting a soil property based on proxies to soil forming factors. So you can see here in the little equation that we have here that for any soil property S, that's a function of multiple categories of these soil forming factors or proxies to them. In this particular case, we can have things like other soil properties they're collocated with the property of interest, in this case organic carbon. Climate properties, of course, precipitation and temperature, which are crucial. Things like organisms, and in this particular category, we have the land cover itself, in terms of vegetation that we can find as organisms, but also representing a little bit what we do as organisms to the soil. We also have topography, relief, things like slope, elevation, and things that can affect the soil organic carbon content. The parent material, which is like the geology, if you want, the rocks that is in a certain location that generates different types of soils. Obviously, all this is in a temporal context, so soils evolve in time, and obviously, again, it's within a spatial context because. For the baseline, again, we're using machine learning methods. We've tried multiple things for this particular model. We're using a tree-like model that is called Cubist, that differs a little bit from like a regression tree in the sense that in the node, the leaves of the trees, instead of having just like a single value as a prediction, the model fits a linear model. We're using, like I already mentioned, we're using digital soil mapping, or the Scorpion approach, in which we try to represent these soil forming factors with maps with global coverage of topography. So we use the digital elevation model and things that we can calculate from it. We have climatic information, so precipitation and temperature mostly. And we have land cover as well. And in this particular case, this is the covariate that we're using, that varies in time, and that we're using to understand the evolution of soil organic carbon in time. Using this methodology, obviously, we can generate predictions, like after we make the inference explicitly in a space, we can generate maps like the ones that you see here on the right. So we can generate predictions, of course, of soil organic carbon, and very importantly, for the digital soil mapping community, as a scientific community, we're interested also in the uncertainty for predictions. We use different methods, but in this particular case, we use a bootstrapping routine where we generate multiple realizations of the maps, and then we can estimate things like standard deviation or any other measure of dispersion. Then for the second component, so with the baseline, we use machine learning methods. But for the second one, we try to incorporate these dynamics in a bit of in a mechanistic way. So of course we use landcover as information as the main source of information, and this is a bit of what we've done in the past, and then I'll show you a little bit what we're doing right now related to this. So we started using a Modis product that generates information, provides like landcover information every year at 500 meter resolution with a global coverage. And well, because I show you that we have like a relatively decent amount of soil organic, soil profile information, but obviously that the world is large and there's a lot of variation. So we don't, many of those classes are underrepresented. So we ended up creating our own classes to try to have enough data to model them. The landcover dynamics that we're interested in, has particularly 3 components. One of them obviously is the magnitude of the change, so how much the soil organic carbon in the soils is changing, the rate at which this change occurs, and the shape or direction, if you wish, of this change in terms of if we're accumulating carbon or if we're losing carbon. First, for the magnitude of the change, this component depends, of course, in the land cover, so the initial and the final land cover, and we also we split the world by like a climatic classification to try to pick different behaviors around the world, because obviously it changes depending where we are. To do this, we take all this information that we have given for a given land cover and a classification, and we can compare them between each other and generate estimate the relative change of soil organic carbon moving from one land cover to another. For instance, here just showing 2 of the climate classifications, going from a land cover 4 to something in the climatic classification, going from land cover 4 to land cover 2, we see that the organic carbon content should be around 66% of the original content. The second component that we have is the rate, and this depends mostly in 2 things. The first one is temperature. Obviously, temperature is very important for any living organism, and we try to represent 2 things here. Temperature. One is the Rubisco carboxylation, which is part of the photosynthesis process. So this is how quickly a plant can basically capture carbon and process carbon, so that we use that for the gains of soil organic carbon. And also temperature going process like respiration, microbial respiration specifically in this case, which is the part of the like the communities, microbial communities take this organic carbon and use it as a source of food basically for them. So with that we can represent how we lose soil organic carbon. The second component is precipitation, where we have obviously in all the range in the world, we can find the 2 extremes, that when it's very, very low, for instance, in hyper arid environments like Atacama Desert, for instance, we consider that the changes are negligible, like very, very low. So organic carbon can be obviously low, but also it doesn't change much in time. There's not much accumulation or losses. And at the other extreme, the effect of precipitation basically stabilizes after a certain amount. So given those 2 bits of information, we can generate like these 2 surfaces that you can see here that represent the gains and losses and the actual rate in any location of the world, given those 2 parameters.
Andrew, you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, so the functions that you're describing here, and then
also the rates associated with land use change on the previous slide. Where are those derived from? Were they like determined empirically from prior studies, or is it primarily like a theoretical derivation? Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So like for like I'm not showing like the actual equations here, but for this we're deriving, getting information from literature in terms of the shapes, if you wish, of these curves. So usually like exponential decays or sigmoid functions, and we parameterize those functions with information that we extracted from our database and the literature as well. So given those curves and the parameters that we found for this study, we were able to generate the two surfaces that we see here. And similar, it's for the other function. I'll show you a couple of extra curves that we generate that also that are parameterized with the soil data that we have.
A question also. You mentioned that agriculture and what's called forestry is an important driver of, I guess, soil carbon. Can you account for that in your system?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, some of these land cover classes, or in this particular case, land cover 2, for instance, that represents croplands, and some of the, I don't remember which one specifically. Land cover 1 represents forests, like in a broad sense. So actually, there's a lot of variation in different forests, but here we group it in a single one. So yeah, we are capturing the dynamics between all those classes. Yeah.
Okay.
So the final component of this dynamics, the thing that we're trying to represent, is obviously the shape. So if we're gaining or losing soil organic carbon, and obviously it depends on the initial and the final land cover, and we also incorporate the rate here to vary the shape basically of the gains or the losses. In this here, obviously we can obtain like a sequence of weight, and we can see how much carbon we're losing or gaining. Here, they're just two examples of, like, it will be 2 pixels, if you wish, of the whole map with different temperatures and precipitations, and we can see that obviously soil organic carbon varies a lot depending where we are in the world. In some places, like, things are more active, there's more accumulation, but also more respiration, so losses are quicker or accumulation is quicker. And some colder places, usually these dynamics take like hundreds of years to reach new equilibrium or quasi-equilibrium states. So given this is just an example, it doesn't really matter, but it's like we take these 3 components and we're able to estimate the change for, here's just an example for let's say a continental climate, from land cover 2 to land cover 3 to land cover 2. So this is a specific pixel. We can get a change of 66%, and this happened at a rate of, this is a unit between, like, normalized between 0 and 1. So given the temperature of that specific location and the precipitation, we have a given rate, and with that we can generate like a sequence of weights that and after that we can infer how much what's the change every single year until we reach the equilibrium. For this specific point, we're losing soil organic carbon, and after the 7 years this reaches a new equilibrium. So, like I mentioned, we're doing this at a global scale, every single pixel, and this is something that already some of results that we did with MODIS at 500-meter resolution, where we're tracking around 15,000 million pixels, 15 billions if you want. So we keep track of all the history of land cover and how they change, if there are changes in soil organic. In the land cover, we keep track of the changes of soil organic carbon. So some of the key findings that we had from this work, obviously we can generate many maps. It's hard to show maps of soil organic carbon with at very detailed scale generally, but I'll give it a try here. So here we have an example in Indonesia, Kalimantan, where we're showing a sequence in a transition from native forest to palm tree plantations. So here you can see in the images, like in the year 2000 and around the year 2007, 2009, there was a change. So the native forest and they planted the palm trees. And you can see that like in the numbers down here, that the landcover classification up to the year 2007 recognized as a forest in this particular case, and then after that as a class 2, which is cropland or agricultural land. So our model obviously after that change, it triggers the process and start losing carbon, as you can see here. And after, like interestingly, in the year 2013, the MODIS land cover recognized this area again as a native forest or as a forest, which I mean we can tell obviously because we're keeping track of all the history that is not the native forest, but it's just a plantation. And this organic carbon just keep, well, in this case, decreasing until it reaches its new equilibrium, and then starts increasing again, but in a slower rate, of course, than what it is losing. Here are some other examples, and this is in Brazil. You can also see like the changes in soil organic carbon, mostly due for the land cover change and the expansion of agricultural areas, which is, you can see it all over the world. Of course, this is another area of Brazil as well. A more larger scale, we can obviously capture details in like larger basins as well, like the Congo basin. There's lost like over a decade, and you can see how the expansion of agriculture is driving all this. And in general scale, in terms of the losses and the connection with emissions, those greenhouse gas emissions, we have estimated that the annual losses in average is around 2 petagrams of soil organic carbon per year. This is in the topsoil, the first 30 centimeters, which is where usually you have like the largest concentrations of soil organic carbon, but also it's more propense to changes to management. Agriculture in general uses just the surface of the soil. And just to put in context this number a little bit, the topsoils of the world were estimated that they have a total stock of around 780 something petagrams of soil organic carbon. So it's a relatively significant loss like every year. And again, in terms of emissions, like to put this number in context, these values are around like 20% larger than the annual production-based emissions of the United States in 2018. So again, it's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions that we get every year from the loss of forest and conversion to agriculture. Most of these changes, of course, happen in the tropics and subtropics, with around 50% of the total global losses concentrated in those areas. So very vulnerable environments, and which are under a lot of pressure.
So question, there's things like ecological damage from like loss of forest, like jungle and native plants. That sort of makes sense. But if we were just to deal with just carbon and would dump a bunch of biochar into the new farmland that comes in, would that make up for it just scale wise, or is it different densities of carbon in the two kinds of soils?
Yeah, I mean, soil organic carbon is a very complex thing. So you like mostly the main problem with that is it's very hard to recover. So the losses happen relatively quickly, and it's very hard to fix that problem. It takes decades or hundreds of years, and not like external inputs of carbon. Although in general sense can improve obviously the soil organic carbon content. The soil organic carbon is very complex. It has different fractions. So some of them are more labile, so they're more available for like microbial communities, but also when they use it and they all the process that happen in the soil that gets stabilized and associated with the mineral fractions of soil. So that's more, it's more protected. So it's very hard to actually replace that sort of organic carbon once it's lost. And that's one of the key problems that we have in general. In agriculture, it's quite common to apply, let's say, organic amendments, not just biochar, but let's say the crop residues or any other organic source things, which more or less keep things rolling a little bit, but we can still see that this, in the long term, we have a decline in the condition of soils.
So then what's the, I'm trying to separate, I guess, the ecological health versus the carbon emissions. So for one thing, like biochar is, inedible to to bacteria, which is kind of why it stays there. But now putting that instead of the edible carbon, like what are we losing in that case?
Yeah, I mean, soil organic carbon, like I mentioned, is an indicator of like many of the functions of that soil provide, and one of them is related with, of course, biodiversity. So when we're changing the types of soil organic carbon, if you wish, every time we're changing this environment, all the communities inside the soil change as well. So there's I don't know if there's a gap, but we understand that those changes happen and the functionalities of the communities change. We're working a lot to try to discover what's happening in the soil and which ones are specifically the ones that change and affect things. But we know that even applying like biochar and organic amendments, the functionalities of the soil change basically. And most of the time, like it gets into like a worse state that it could be like something that is at least that we don't touch, basically, like in a natural state.
Oh, David, you had a question?
Yeah, Jose, and maybe there's a slide on this coming up. But
that's right.
Is your model able to identify locations where there's gain in carbon concentration or carbon stock over time? Within a land cover, land use class, or because of change as well?
Yeah, no, definitely. We have. I mostly show losses of organic carbon because they are like significantly higher than the gains. But yeah, I mean, we're capable of detecting that. So we can see them very like in locations where we have, let's say, agricultural abandonment, and you have the succession from agricultural land to a secondary forest and perhaps a forest, like in areas like in Russia and the ex-USSR countries, or in many places actually, even in Brazil. That obviously happens when sometimes there's like a decline in agriculture, like people just abandon the land and they move somewhere else. So we can see that there's like an improvement and an accumulation of organic carbon in time, but the process of losing or gaining carbon has like two very different dynamics. So like I mentioned already, like the carbon losses happen relatively quickly in a window of like, I don't know, let's say between 5 and 20 years, 30 years, we can reach the new equilibrium state, if you wish. But in terms of gains, that can take hundreds of years. So obviously, the thing that is like the more evident when we start doing this analysis from one year to another is like we can lose a significant proportion of organic carbon in the first year. But when we're talking about gains, could be like a relatively small proportion. So, but yes, this model captures both the losses and the gains. Well, I'll talk a little bit about the details as well of the things that we can capture, because obviously this is more like a global and relatively general model. So there's like obviously things that we're missing there. So this is in terms of emission, which is obviously quite significant and a contribution to climate change. But also this affects other aspects, not just that. So in terms of soil productivity, or like I've been saying, like in the last few minutes, like there's like generally a decline in the soil condition, which affects productivity. And in the literature, like some people talk about soil organic carbon critical limits, like that when the soils fall below those limits, the agriculture or the vegetation production drops significantly. For tropical, which varies around the world, obviously, but for tropical areas, it's generally considered like around 1.1% of the organic carbon. And with this study, with this monitoring system that we have, we've identified that around 11 million hectares per year fall below that limit in tropical areas. And a similar thing we observe in temperate areas. Obviously a small area, but still significant, 5 million hectares every year. So every year in general, we have 16 million hectares that are really hard to recover and that are not very useful in terms of productivity. Obviously, other aspects are also affected, not just production of food or biomass. And it's very important to consider that soils are a limited resource. So obviously, it's a natural resource, and can regenerate. But here we're talking about very large scales of time, sometimes millions of years. If by erosion you lose a lot of the soil, that can take hundreds of years, thousands of years to recover. So degrading the soil and moving somewhere else, it's not something that we should do, definitely. So that's some of the work that we've done in the past. I mean, we're still doing, but we're trying to move towards like a global early warning system, basically, to identify these areas that are before we reach those critical levels, of course. So like the main improvement that we're doing here, it's well, one of them where we need more detailed information in terms of resolution, and this is something we've been doing with David. With mineral, and we're trying to, like during this year, we're trying to move this system from 500-meter resolution provided by MODIS to a 30-meter resolution prediction. Again, here we have our own landcover product at 30 meters. So because we're using Landsat, that allows us, I don't know if probably I didn't mention it, but you probably you saw on the map that they use mentioned a lot the year 2001, which is the year where MODIS starts providing this product. But now that we're using Landsat, and we can move that baseline back to the 80s, 1985 specifically in this case. So which give us like a wider window, basically, almost reaching the 40 years that the title of this presentation suggests. So that's very important because we can capture a lot of the soil data that was provided, that was generated during the 80s and the 90s, which is probably the peak of soil data generation around the world, and we couldn't include before. So that gives us like more representation of some land cover and climate interactions, and of course we have like more detailed. Here's hard to see, probably. I cannot see here because it's really bright, but well, you can see here I'm trying to zoom in, but yeah, I don't know if you can see it. Hopefully you can. So you can see like way more detailed, of course, 30 meters versus 500. I'm sure you understand the level of detail that we gain here. So obviously, well, we're using Google Earth Engine to do all this tracking. And obviously now we're moving to like way more pixels every year, so almost 250,000 million pixels that track. So we keep track on all these curves that I already mentioned for every single pixel of the world for this almost 40 years. Some of the future improvements or current improvements that we're working here to try to get like a better like warning system or monitoring system for organic carbon is to incorporate the climate change effect. So initially we did some explorations on the effect in the window that we had like around 20 years, and we couldn't find anything that significant. And land cover change definitely is the stronger factor there versus climate change. But now that we have a longer window, I mean, we know that soils are going to change with climate change, and there are obviously local studies that show that as well. So now I think that we're covering a larger window, we'll see a stronger effect. So we can differentiate the effect of sort of the landcover change versus the climate change effect. That should be relatively easy because it's, like I already mentioned, temperature and precipitation. It's part of the model already, so it will be a matter of updating that information. And the biggest challenge that we have, and we would like to incorporate eventually, is like the within class changes. Here I'm talking about changes between forest and cropland, like a very broad categories. But we're interested in, well, obviously for each category we can disaggregate that even further, but particularly for cropping systems, we're interested in what happened with different crops, of course, and also different management practices, which change obviously for every crop and every country and every location. So that's very hard to actually incorporate and get good data, reliable data about it. There are some countries where we do have information where they keep track of different crops and managements, like governments keep track of that, for instance, in Europe, but in many places of the world that's not there. There's like a huge potential there to use, and I've seen in the remote sensing community a lot of work in these kind of things, like to try to use satellite imagery and image classification, deep learning models to try to differentiate different crops and sometimes different managements. So that's something interesting to explore. Obviously, at a global scale, it will be challenging, but perhaps doable. But even then,
question.
Sorry.
For this one, because this would be extremely valuable for many purposes.
Yes.
I guess what hopes do we have? Because it means it like is it really like different species have like show up differently on multispectral images, or are there underground data you can use, or some of like local apps where people give you samples but all over the world?
Yeah, exactly. I mean that would be, yeah. I mean obviously that you have a thing like in terms of well, obviously the information about the crops and the management, but also like here says that we also require more data to represent those things. I mean things like relying directly on the farmers. I mean, it's possible, but in terms of like getting information in the field, generally like how to standardize that is usually complicated. Obviously, we're working in multiple methods to try to get information like easily and in a like more reliable, and actually is more cost effective using different sensors like proximal sensors to get information about the soil, and that will be really valuable. Like people providing their information in terms of soil and the management that they have. It's complicated with agriculture because also there's like things about like people have concerns about data privacy, and that kind of things. But well, I know people in many places, including Google, they work in many interesting systems to train models like preserving privacy. I've done a little bit of work on that as well, which is definitely something that could be incorporated in this system to gather more information. So I think that's key in moving forward, because well, again, we can get a lot of information from remote sensing data, but like the problem of getting soil data from the field, that's complicated. I show you the database, the collection of profiles that we have, that is not very large in comparison with all the spatial and temporal variability of soils. So yeah, any improvements in that area, they will be great, and they could inform these models.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to finish, it's basically like taking all this information of soil organic, climate change, the effect of climate change, and different management systems and how things evolve in time. We can obviously start using this model and this information that we generate in scenario analysis to try to inform management, of course, like at a local scale, let's say for farmers, so they can improve or sustain their production in time, and they don't have to, the soils don't get depleted and they have to move somewhere else. And obviously, we're also interested in informing policy for the dimension that one of the dimensions of soil security is codification. So if necessary, like to assist people that is protecting the soils with some sort of incentive, or in more extreme cases, perhaps you have areas with very unique soils that should be maintained for some sort of reference, to have policy that supports that as well. Obviously, to overall improve the soil conditions, not just for in croplands, but other areas that we affect. And here we're talking obviously a lot about agricultural production, but there are other aspects that we need to consider, like biodiversity, something that we already touched a little bit. And finally, basically secure the soils of the world, because they are in danger and under a lot of pressure, and which will increase. And we know that things are going to change with climate change, and soils are going to be affected obviously in the next 20, 40, 50 years. But we're not totally sure how this is going to interact with the production systems that we have in place. And that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks, Jose. I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
I guess looking back over the whole thing there, you called out some future areas of work, and I think one of your last slides called out having more information on the crop types or the particular management practices, and that brought to mind, I guess, the question, like, if you were to invest further in this project, like, would you rather get more carbon data to train it, or better resolution on some of the practices themselves across the world? Where would you get more bang for your buck, I guess, in terms of getting more insights into how things are changing?
Yeah, I mean, if I have to, I don't know if I will pick one or the other. I think we need both, like to be fair, because sure, we add a little bit of granularity here to the model to try to identify different systems. That's great, but at the moment we don't have all the information to represent that. And and if we have the soil data without having like not resolution but more detailed land use in terms of crop and management, obviously we cannot relate the soil information with that. So I mean, if like moving forward, we need to do both, I think, definitely. It's challenging at a global scale. Obviously, this model is a global model, but we can also apply it at smaller scale, like let's say a national scale or regional scale. So which it could be like a good thing. So you can start like incrementally improving this in different parts of the world. Like I mentioned before, in some areas of the world, this is possible already, like to get all this information. So it is possible to incorporate it. Yeah.
And then when one of your early slides had that kind of geographic spread of where the data's come from, there were some big gaps, of course, like North Africa, where I guess there isn't. It's I guess desert, but a lot of Russia seems to be a big gap in your mind in the map. Are there particular areas you would like to get data from, either geographically like that, or would you target where carbon is, or where soils are currently undergoing land use change, to better understand the kind of dynamics in that kind of critical period? Yeah, so I mean, we have like this, the two extremes. Obviously, we have areas that are not very well covered or represented, but they don't change that much. Okay. I mean, obviously there are changes, so we don't need annual data in that area, for instance. But it will be anyway useful to have like a bit more information, like circumpolar regions and vulnerable areas that maybe they're not under a lot of pressure right now, but they might be. Well, depends on where we are. Like wetlands have a lot of pressure in some areas of the world, but in some others they're not under pressure. So have that information to understand how that like, for instance, climate change is affecting them is very important. But obviously when we're talking about areas where that are under a lot of pressure, we do need more density in terms of space and time as well. So like to cover those dynamics. So yeah, I always think again it's tricky, but most of the soil information that we get comes from like
like generally bottom-up effort. So it's like a country or like a global organization or something generating this soil information. So they try to cover a relatively large area, but also the campaigns are not that regular. Something like I mentioned before, like we had a lot of soil sampling during the 80s, 90s, but then that sort of stopped for a very long time, for many decades. In some areas of the world, obviously it didn't, but so we can, in some parts, like in the US, we have a lot of data. In Europe, we have a lot of data, but in some other locations of the world, we don't have that. On the other hand, we do have a lot of production of soil information that we don't have access to. In agricultural production, every single year, people take soil samples to make decisions about fertilizer application, or if they're designing irrigation systems, or why not. So there's a lot of information there that obviously we don't have access to. And for me, at least moving forward, I think it will be very interesting to see some sort of system to try to get all this information. So like the things that change quickly and they're under a lot of pressure, like agricultural land, we need a lot of samples, but we need to use that information somehow. Yeah. So collaboration between, well, academia, government, private companies, of individual farmers, that's crucial for this kind of initiatives if we want to secure soils.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, let me ask you one question. For a lot of policy decisions about, I don't know, like biochar or alternative crops, or a mixture of different crops with each other, you need to have far more granular information about, like, which, not even crop types, it's crop management types. I guess, how can we even approximate that, or even if it's a regional thing? Because informing, like, what do you do in a given scenario is presumably a huge part of the value of a map like this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, getting that information is, will be very valuable, of course. So we can incorporate and we can actually generate and understand this. I mean, there's a lot of management practice, and like you mentioned, this varies like depending where you are. So we have a general understanding that there are better management practices, but we don't know specifically how they interact with it. Like soil is very complex and it varies a lot. So we don't know exactly how it interacts with soils in every single location of the world. Maybe in some areas it's not that important, but for sure we know that there's variation. So there's some that might be more effective in some areas, in some specific soils, under certain climatic conditions, and maybe they're ineffective at all, like in a different scenario. For instance, something that is very common in many countries is like no tillage. So try to reduce the intervention in soils, but in many areas with like semi-arid climates, that doesn't work because you accumulate with like the material there, and it doesn't have time to decompose and incorporate into the soil, for instance. So we know that in some areas that it's something that is considered like a very good management practice actually doesn't work. So we need to find and capture that. I mean, obviously there's a lot of local knowledge and people know about these kind of things, but obviously as you move higher up in the chain, a lot of these things get lost in terms of policy, but also when we're talking about this, how we generate and how we capture all this complexity within global models, of course.
Right. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Good. I think there's no more questions.
Well, let me ask one more. How do you think, like, I guess process-based models of soils might play into this, that are kind of more, like first and second order models actually take, local measurements of soils?
But process-based models, obviously they're quite important. We have a lot of very, very good models, or let's say good models for try to explain the behavior of soils in general, so organic carbon and agricultural land and all the situations. But in general, it's really hard to. They've been developed most of the time like in relatively restrained conditions, so they generally don't represent very well that like a global scenario, so they don't scale properly. And the amount of work that you usually have to do to apply them. So when you take one of these models and try to apply it at a local scale, there's a lot of tuning basically that you have to do, like incorporate local data, which is not trivial. So to do it, like the effort to do that at a global scale also, but perhaps it's even more work than try to do something a bit like in a combination in a semi-mechanistic or purely empirical model. Eventually, we want to try to move. Obviously, we would like to try to capture all these dynamics with an empirical model. So, like a model that is a bit more complex, but we also, of course, we need a lot of data to represent that. And for this particular project, we decided we got this pragmatic decision basically to sit in the middle, because we want obviously to incorporate those dynamics, but we don't have all the data necessary to represent it. So that's why we need to mix both basically. But
yeah, can I just add to that commentary?
Of course. Yeah.
I think it's Alex McBratney, Sydney Uni. I think at the present time, I see that there are what I would call the classic soil carbon models that developed in the 70s and 80s. It came from Rothamsted and Colorado or places like this. Pool-based models, and then there are more biochemical or biogeochemical models that are being developed. So there's a little bit, it's not clear to me at the moment which of these in the long run will perform better. I know more about the pool-based models, particularly the Rothamsted model. There's not that many places in the world where we have the data that we could run that model. We do have the various pools at reasonable spatial resolution for the whole of Australia, but I think that's fairly unusual. And so if we are going to go down that route, and I think more detailed modeling, mechanistic modeling would be helpful. I think if we go down that route, we will need to consider how to generate data that will drive those models. So there will be a fair requirement of generating new data, either actually collecting samples and measuring it, but also how to estimate those pool concentrations from other data. So there's a bit of work will need to be done if we're going to go down that route. But I think going down that route will help. The other comment I wanted to make around particularly around land cover, land use, and cropping is that the identification of different crops is fairly advanced. So within the land cover, the idea of a land cover being cropping, I think we could go further with the type of crop. But once again, I think that the challenge there is soil data that accompanies that we can use to monitor the rather subtle changes that will probably occur. So I think in order of importance, it looks like at the moment land use change is the big one, climate change is coming in second, and then changes in practices is probably coming in third. But if we will need to build a more sophisticated model to verify that. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't build that model and try to understand at least how we can improve the situation in certain circumstances.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Jose, thank you so much for the talk today. Where can people find out more? Are there plans to publish, or where can they find you, I guess, online?
Yeah, so I mean, at the University of Sydney website, if you look for my name or Alex's name, we have like a list there with all the projects on soil organic carbon. So we have this monitoring system, all the new soil security framework that Alex design, and we're working very hard to implement things related about soil organic carbon sequestration as well. We do a lot of work on that. We constantly publish all our work, so Google Scholar. I guess I can send a link around with Google Scholar and that kind of things, links. So we try to publish all this, and from this collaboration with you, we'll have a new publication for sure to update the results when we generate all the maps. So for sure we get more insights and a larger window of analysis. So yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Jose. Thanks, Alex. Good to see you both. Take care.
Good to see you. Thanks for organizing everything. And yeah.
Thanks for believing in our work.
Exactly.